Hi, everyone. So thank you for joining us. My name is Suhini Chowdhury, and I'm Deputy CEO, Head of Research at the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. Today, our panelists will discuss the Foundation's landmark study, the Parkinson's Progression Markers Initiative, or PPMI for short. We'll cover the study's expansion and impact, scientific results coming out of PPMI, and the critical role you can play in speeding a cure. We've got a lot to discuss, so we're going to get started. But before we do, I did want to just remind you that if you have a question, you can type it in the Q&A box in the middle of your screen. Foundation staff and our panelists will get to as many as we can over the course of this webinar. And if you want any other helpful information or you want to download the slides, check the resource list on your screen. Before diving into things, I want to take a moment to introduce our panelists. We have Dr. Ken Merrick, the President and Senior Scientist of the Institute for Neurodegenerative Disorders in New Haven, Connecticut. He's also the Principal Investigator, aka the head honcho of PPMI. We also have Ray James, a nurse specialist in the Parkinson's Disease Movement Disorder Center at Boston University Medical Campus. He's also the PPMI study coordinator at our Boston University site. Jen Gaudio of New London, Connecticut, was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2010. She was one of the first participants to ever enroll in PPMI at the Institute for Neurodegenerative Disorders. And last, but certainly not least, we have Jerry Pollack of Meridian, Idaho. He doesn't have Parkinson's, but his father, brother, and sister all did. He's a PPMI participant at our University of Washington VA Puget Sound Healthcare System site. Thank you all for joining us today and welcome to this webinar. If we could advance to the first slide. And I'm not sure if it is because I can't see, but I'm going to assume we can. I wanted to maybe start off, before diving straight into PPMI, I wanted to start off and maybe talk a little bit about what it takes to accelerate science. Living in these past 2 years of the pandemic, one of the silver linings out of it has been the ability to actually see what can happen and how quickly science can react to things. And I think the COVID vaccine sort of shows us the possibilities of fast science delivering impactful things into patients or patients' hands. And so, Dr. Merrick, maybe what I'll start off first is asking you, what does it take, or what will it take, to really move Parkinson's science to get us there faster in terms of delivering impactful therapies into patients' hands?
Great. Thank you so much, Sohini, and thanks everyone for listening. So I think really the key to moving us forward is acquiring sort of convincing, reliable information or data from as many people as possible. I think one of the issues we have in Parkinson's disease is that we think of this as a single entity, but it's really many different entities, that everyone with Parkinson's disease is a little different. So collecting information on the experience of many, many different people is extremely valuable to us in order to try to understand what the best ways are to move forward for the most people. I think the other point here is that we need to collect information in a timely way, and we need it to be over time. So not just one time, but over a period of time, because of course Parkinson's disease is a disease that changes over time, and we need to understand how it changes in different people. So I think that's really a key. And, it's an area where we really need the help of everybody on this call.
Thank you, Ken. And I think that's a great segue then into jumping into exactly what PPMI is, because essentially PPMI really is trying to address a lot of what you just outlined as critical factors that would help us accelerate and get a better understanding of disease to therefore treat the disease. And so for those on this webinar who may not be familiar with PPMI, as I mentioned earlier, PPMI stands for the Parkinson's Progression Markers Initiative, and it's one of the landmark studies within MJFF's research portfolio. It was launched around 11 years ago with the goal of following following individuals with and without Parkinson's disease and collecting enormous amounts of information on these individuals, asking them questions when they come to the site about, about cognition, about motor, about balance, all sorts of things like that, about imaging their brain, collecting different biosamples, etc., all with the idea of really developing as much information to understand exactly what Dr. Merrick identified, to understand how does this disease progress. And we know it progresses differently for different people. So what can we sort of parse out? Like, are there different journeys? Are there 8 different journeys? Are there more? Are there 2 different journeys? And how can we maybe better understand who might be on what journey as they go through Parkinson's disease? And so it's really been a critical sort of a critical study to help us gain that understanding. Again, all with the idea that if you better understand the disease, you're better able to then determine, is a drug having an effect on that disease? It progresses at a certain rate, and we have a drug and we can test it. Does it stop or slow that progression? And so that's why it's been such a landmark study. And the exciting thing about the study is that in the past 11 years, we have seen how the study has firsthand really catalyzed the biopharma industry. We know that there are over 20 clinical trials that have moved into clinical testing because they've been able to utilize data coming out of PPMI to sort of gain that sense of, yes, there's something here, let's move in and let's really test our drug now with patients. And that's extremely exciting. But we are here still to talk about PPMI. So clearly our job with PPMI is not yet done. And so again, Dr. Merrick, maybe I'll go back to you. I referenced earlier expansion and the study expansion. And could you talk a little bit about why are we expanding the study and what do we hope to accomplish by expanding PPMI?
Certainly, thank you. So just taking a step back, so PPMI is really a study which is designed to collect information to try to understand what are the determinants of disease progression, with the goal being that with this information in hand, we can accelerate therapies that would be more effective for the larger number of people. We initially focused this study on individuals with Parkinson's disease, but as we have expanded our the PPMI program, we have both been able to increase the number of individuals who we now have involved in the study with Parkinson's disease, but also move to try to understand what are the sort of determinants of Parkinson's disease before it begins. So that is to say, individuals who don't yet have Parkinson's disease, but we believe have some level of risk of developing Parkinson's disease during the next few years. And we hope that if we can focus on these individuals, ultimately we can identify what are the different journeys these people take, and eventually identify drugs that might actually prevent the onset of disease in addition to treating the symptoms of disease. So this is, as you can imagine, is a difficult task because we need to involve many thousands of individuals who we can ask to participate and to provide information in order to identify those much smaller number of individuals who we believe might be actually at risk to develop Parkinson's disease.
Thank you, Dr. Merrick. And I think, this is, your number of thousands is a great way to underscore just how, at the end of the day, clinical research really relies on individuals volunteering and participating in that research. It's a true partnership between the science and the individual participant. And when we think about volunteers, clearly we would not be where we are today. The field would not be where it is today without the over 1,400 individuals who have participated in PPMI to date. And I'd like to now turn it over to Jen and Jerry for a moment. And I'd like to ask you both if you would be willing to share some of the motivations that drove you to participate in PPMI. And maybe I'll start with you, Jen, if you wouldn't mind talking to us as one of the first participants to enroll in the study back in 2010. What were some of the drivers that led you to make that decision?
Well, I started having symptoms in 2007 when I was living in Virginia, and I was afraid it was Parkinson's, but no one would tell me directly because I was 38 years old and a woman, which was unusual, I guess. And when I moved up to Connecticut, things started advancing, and I found a fantastic neurologist, Dr. Morrow, who, again, well, she told me she thought I had Parkinson's, but she didn't want to diagnose me with that, sending me to the Institute for Neurodegenerative Disorders, where I met Dr. Russell, and we talked about the prognosis, and I was uncomfortable with the way that I was being tested for Parkinson's, and so the conclusion was that I was actually diagnosed by the PPMI study because they had a DAT scan, which proved at the time it was not used for diagnostic purposes. And it proved that I did have Parkinson's. And from there, it was a no-brainer to stay in the program because I was devastated and could not think of any other way to fight this disease by providing data to help cure it. And that was the ultimate motive. It was a little bit altruistic and a lot of saving my own sanity, giving me a goal to fight for.
I think your answer really highlights that it's probably never one driver of why one makes a decision to participate in research. And there's probably a lot of factors that come into play. And I'm curious, Jerry, having heard Jen's experience, what was your experience like? What were some of the things that you were contemplating as you thought about participating in PPMI?
Well, as you heard from Sohini's introduction, my father, brother, and sister were all Parkinson's victims. That in itself was motivation enough for me to join the PPMI study. Not only do I owe it to them and the rest of our family, but it's an opportunity to hopefully contribute in some way to the advancement of the research and ultimately positive outcomes.
It really was something that I could cling to as something productive that, as Jerry said, that he owed it to his family. It was the best thing in the world for me to feel like I was contributing to something greater than myself.
Well, I mean, I can speak on, I just want to take a moment to just thank you both for sharing that and also just again for your continued support and participation in PPMI. It is very inspirational. I might just turn things over. Ray, I haven't had a chance to talk to you yet, but you clearly are at the front line as one of the site personnel study coordinator who often interacts with individuals very early on as they're thinking about whether they want to participate in a clinical research study, and in this case in PPMI. And I'm just curious, what are some of the questions that you get as you talk to people about this study, and in particular, if I could ask you to address one of the things that I know is always of interest to people is the fact that through participation in a study like this, you're giving a lot of information about yourself. And people are naturally always concerned about how that information will be safeguarded. So how do you also address the concerns around privacy and sort of and data safeguarding data and information?
Yeah, thanks, Sohini, and thanks, everyone. It's nice to join this panel and also to be part of this study since its beginning back in 2010. And you asked a lot of great questions there, and that definitely opens up the floor to just a lot of things in terms of what people have questions about, and how are we keeping information safe and secure, because it is a lot of information that we have to go through. And oftentimes people wonder, what information is going to be clinically relevant versus what information is going to be kept as part of the research. I think, that's another thing that comes up too, but it's important for people to know that their information is going to be kept secure. There's a lot of passwords and firewalls and things like that that we use at our institutions and hospitals to make sure that that information is kept secure. We also have to make sure that we pass muster with the ethics boards that review these studies. So these aren't just generated out of nowhere. I mean, we have to make sure that what we're doing is correct. So we have regulatory specialists, other scientists, physicians, nurses, people in the community who look at this study and make sure that we're really safeguarding people's information in the right way. It's not being sold to other people. And we make sure to code people's information too. So, at a site, we hold on to that information, and then we make sure to code it so that when it's given over to other researchers to look at and analyze, they do it in a somewhat de-identified fashion. So when they do pull all that data together and they share the results, it's not your personal information that's going to be part of that. Another question people often ask is, well, how long am I going to be part of this study? As Dr. Merrick said, it's over time that Parkinson's changes. And so, yes, it's going to take a bit of time. And what we're asking people to do is to commit to 5 years in this study. And like Jen is doing, she's even participating a bit longer. She's been part of this study for a long time now. And so we're offering an extension for folks who were part of that original cohort and can
They can't get rid of me.
A few more years.
Thank you, Ray. One of the things. Oh, go ahead, Jen. Oh,
this
sorry.
is Jerry.
Jerry, go ahead.
I might add that I think I've been in this study now either 5 or 6 years, and am obviously continuing. So, hopefully, I was going to say this could go on forever. And I'd like to be there to do it.
I'm actually signed off on donating my brain at the end of it, because I would like to provide the most clear package of information. And if they need my tissues for it, then I am all for it, because I won't be needing it at that point.
I think you both raise, Dr. Merrick, you mentioned earlier, and Ray referenced this, over time, but I think one of the things we're realizing with PPMI that maybe surpassed our original expectations is that just how much more valuable the information is that are contributed by participants, the longer they stay in the study, and the longer we can sort of see their individual journey with the disease and compare it to those who may not, and to really start to tease out, what is going on. And so I'm just curious, listening to this, what are your thoughts about the longevity of PPMI and the value of being able to really have this longitudinal data set?
Yeah, no, I totally agree that these longitudinal data sets are increasingly valuable. And, I always tell people that, every day you participate, your data gets more and more valuable. So Jen is really off the charts here. And I think that, it's valuable in a number of ways. It's valuable, of course, because we learn what happens to people over time. But let me make one other point in how it's valuable, and that it's a way of accelerating research, because now we have this data. We are collecting all these clinical information. And we also are collecting what we call biosamples. We're collecting blood and urine and spinal fluid, and those are stored. So when new ideas come up, we can sort of access these biosamples, and we already have all of that information on all of these people over the years to complement those biosamples. And this has really enabled us to really take advantage of new ideas as the study has gone on in a very efficient way. And I think it's really helped us to be really jumpstart a number of different areas in Parkinson's.
Yeah, I think one of the things, I hope our audience is realizing is what a unique research study PPMI is. I mean, it's designed to try to get in a short-term fashion to some really essential questions to try to drive drug development, but it's also been designed to be this ongoing resource for research so that as new ideas come up, we don't have to start over, but that we can actually leverage what has already been built. And I think that's a very unique type of infrastructure, if I can call it that, in the research community. One of the things, if we keep moving, is that, in 2010, when PPMI started, it was a very different world than what it is today. And one of the exciting aspects of the expansion of the study is that not everything has to occur within a traditional clinical research setting. What most people think of, you go to a site, you meet with someone like Ray, you talk, you have your blood drawn or your other samples are collected that can reference, etc. And you do this maybe every 6 months. One of the unique things about the expansion of PPMI is actually the launch of an online study component. So whereby really anyone over the age of 18 in the United States, and hopefully next year outside of the United States, are able to actually contribute information wherever they have an internet connection, and to be able to kind of contribute to the study in a different way. And so, Dr. Merrick, maybe what I might go back to sort of talk a little bit about how does this online portion of the PPMI study, how does it fit within some of the other sort of components of the study, like the traditional clinical visits that I just described?
So PPMI Online really complements the more traditional clinical component of the study. PPMI Online has just been launched, very exciting, and we're all now much more familiar with going online and getting information and buying things we need and so forth. Here what we're asking people to do, anyone who's over 18, is just go on and provide us with some information about you. Based on your responses, we are going to potentially ask you to provide some additional information. But this is a way where we can really kind of broaden the study dramatically, and enable individuals to participate now throughout the country, but hopefully throughout the world, and also increase the numbers of individuals who participate dramatically. We're thinking again to have tens of thousands of people on this PPMI Online platform that can provide information. And this will really serve two roles. One, it will dramatically accelerate our understanding of Parkinson's disease in general, but it also provides us with an opportunity to really identify individuals, as I was mentioning earlier, who might have some additional risk of Parkinson's disease, who we might be able to identify and ultimately bring them into the more detailed PPMI study that can help us even further.
And I think for those of you who may be intrigued by this, I believe that you can actually, there's a Get Started button in the Take Action box on the bottom right of your screen. So while we definitely don't want to lose your attention for this webinar, you can actually, I think, kind of click that button and explore online, and sort of see what that entails. And again, I think, Dr. Merrick, you referenced a really important component, which is that you can get so much information from tens of thousands of individuals. And I'm always reminded by, something that Michael has said, which is if you meet one Parkinson's patient, you've met one Parkinson's patient. And the journeys and the heterogeneous nature of the disease is such that you really need to learn about everyone's journey with Parkinson's to really tease out, again, the essentials of how we tackle this disease. And I think an online component really just allows us to get to that scale, that number of volunteers that we would never otherwise be able to do, which is just so exciting.
And to reach individuals, I was going to say, and to reach individuals who might not have easy access to kind of experts in in movement disorders, this is an opportunity for everyone, anywhere now, again, around the U.S. and hopefully larger to participate. And we would encourage you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think the online component of the study is fascinating. And I think we're so excited about the potential of it and what it's going to yield as more and more individuals enroll. But the study itself, the clinical component, again, the part that maybe we're more familiar with, is actually also expanding. And we're moving actually from over 30 sites from the original iteration of the study when it was launched in 2010 to around 50 sites in 12 countries, and really looking to enroll up to 4,000 individuals, which again is really a testament to kind of, trying to get as much information from as large a group as we can to really hit some of these important questions we need to hit to understand how we can accelerate developing therapies. In this particular slide, we talk a little bit about two, while the study is open to everyone, and, we just talked about the fact that if you're over 18 in the United States and eventually outside of the United States, you can participate through the online portion of the study. There are some groups that we have a particular interest in really making sure that they hear this call to action and they consider getting involved. And I think that the first group I wanted to kind of highlight is the group that we call the de novo Parkinson's group, which are individuals with Parkinson's disease who were diagnosed within the past 2 years, so relatively early in the course of their disease and are not yet on medication. And again, Jen, I was going to go back to you because in 2010, you fit this profile, and you referenced it a little bit that you were at that point in time really trying to get to the diagnosis of your disease, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But did you have any concerns about sort of being in that early stage of diagnosis and participating for a research initiative? Was there any concerns? And if there were, how did you mitigate that?
I was not. I tend to do a lot of things all or nothing. And I was in the process of being diagnosed before I went to the Institute. I was put on medication that scared the life out of me. One made my tears and sweat turn black. Another was hallucinations. And it seemed to me to be an inelegant and kind of crazy way to diagnose an illness, right? Giving this medication. And so when I was presented with the opportunity to help not only confirm the diagnosis scientifically, but to help get around that kind of, honestly, in some cases, the medication is worse than the disease. And it was, I don't even think I really thought of it at all. It was something I had to do. Mm-hmm. Because things are culminating to a point for me. I've had to give up a job I loved. I'm waiting for disability. It's torture when it advances, and it's hard to remain hopeful. And the way I remain hopeful is to try and give back. If I have to suffer this, then it's got to mean something. Mm-hmm. And that is the way it means something. And I'll take, the possible privacy implications or odd, lumbar punctures or whatever, although Dr. Russell is excellent at lumbar punctures. I never feel them. But it was just something I had to do. And I probably should have thought more carefully, but it being in the program saved my sanity on a number of levels. So.
Well, thank you for being so frank and sharing that. Ray, listening to Jen, I'm just wondering, you interact with a lot of individuals who have just recently been diagnosed and are coming in and talking about the study and asking questions about it. And what are some of the concerns that people who are recently diagnosed might have about study participation?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on some of that already. Obviously there's some risks there to anything you're going to do when you participate in research or when you go to have even a clinical intervention. So one has to consider that and really think about how that lines up with, kind of the risk benefits, so to speak. Do those benefits really outweigh the risk for you? So yeah, I have to talk to a lot of people about that. Of course, there's going to be concerns about, like we mentioned earlier, some privacy concerns, but also, not everyone's used to getting a lumbar puncture done or, having their blood drawn whenever they come in for a visit. So there's, obvious concern about that. And I find that a lot of times that may be rooted in the unknown.
The only thing, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
The only thing I'm disappointed about is that I don't have superpowers yet. Because I've been through a number of so many x-rays and so many injections. I at least could have superpowers.
Kind of like that radioactive spider that bites you, I guess.
Yeah.
Spider-Man. But yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, so can you give us maybe a little bit of insight? An individual comes in, you talk to them about the study. What can they expect when they come in for that conversation and that first clinic visit?
Yeah, absolutely. If it's a first time, we've got to go through the consent form. We've got to make sure that people are comfortable. They've gone through it. They've asked all the questions they possibly can. And then we go ahead and we sign that, and then we move forward with some study activities, whatever it is we have to do. Again, that's going to run the range of things. So that first time, we also, these days, like we said, we're in a pandemic, so we're still trying to move this thing forward. So we still have to ask people about COVID and make sure that we're taking all the right precautions. So our teams are fully vaccinated. But, we're asking all people to come. We're asking people of all different backgrounds. We need diverse populations of folks, as many people stepping up to the plate as possible to be part of this. But so when they come in, besides checking all those things out, we do like to have some fun along the way. Got to do that. But we are going to take folks through a bunch of exams. There's a physical exam, a neuro exam, something focused on Parkinson's, where we have people tap just like they might do with their doctor or might expect to do if they were being evaluated for Parkinson's. Yes, we do have to do the samples. So, there is some blood draws and collecting urine. And now the screening visit, we're just seeing to make sure that that's a safe thing to do, all these other things that we might be doing. So we're really at that first visit, just making sure that you're safe, that this is appropriate for you. If it's not appropriate for you, we're not going to move ahead with this. And then we can move to baseline and other visits where we might be doing a DAT scan, which would help us identify those dopamine levels or whether they're off or not, as they can be in Parkinson's, and doing an MRI. And also we're doing some cognitive testing with folks too. I like to call brain games, the fun way of looking at it, but we're testing memory, attention, language, and other things. So even smell testing, we do that too. It's a little scratch and sniff. So, it's one of those hallmarks in Parkinson's, where people do tend to lose their ability to identify smell on the same level they were prior to, showing symptoms of Parkinson's, which we always think is, an interesting way to kind of track this and see who might have Parkinson's, even though just because you lost your sense of smell doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go on to get Parkinson's, but it is one of those hallmarks there.
I'd like to piggyback on your outline of what you might expect. I thought it was a lot of fun, especially the cognitive portion. I mean, who knew about smelling and tasting and as you say, the brain games, which I failed miserably. But of course you don't know that because nobody tells you. Anyway, it was and continues to be a really, really worthwhile experience. Discounting, the prodding and the poking and the whatever else, and the imaging, it is an extraordinarily painless, if you will, experience. And the people that I've been in contact with for my, twice yearly evaluations have been just terrific, just super. And they couldn't make it more user friendly. So I thought I would just add to what you've already outlined.
The only thing I could recommend is you change up the brain games, because I've done them for so long I could do them in my sleep.
We will note that down. But, Jerry, this is a great, I wanted to turn to you because the other, the other group that we are particularly focused on within PPMI are, individuals. Ken referenced, Dr. Merrick referenced this earlier, individuals who might help us better understand risk and who might go on to develop Parkinson's, and who doesn't and why. And one of the components of risk clearly is family heritage or family history of Parkinson's disease. And I was curious, you mentioned this a little bit in your earlier remarks about the fact that your family members had Parkinson's, that it was a motivator for you. And I'm just curious, did you think about risk for yourself, and did that come into play as you thought about PPMI and providing that information for research?
You mean in terms of participation?
Yes.
Not for a moment. In my case, my family situation, selfishly speaking, it seems to me that I'm somewhat of a miracle. And I'm, in an odd sort of way, grateful. On the other hand, in my situation, personally speaking, I'm obligated to participate in this program. There was never any sort of hesitation, and there hasn't been since. I have to say, for those who are out there who are considering being part of this program, the best way I can describe it for myself is that it's been a slam dunk.
Oh, that is great to hear, that it's been such a positive experience. And, I think, again, it's so important that this study obviously yield information that helps us with research, but we also want this study to have an impact for those who are involved. And I think, Jen and Jerry, you certainly show the fact, you certainly highlight that participation yields its own benefits in this particular research study, which is, I think, really a powerful sentiment. Ken,
I just wanted to add that, I think the participants are really partners in the research effort. I mean, this research is not possible without participants, and we hope that it is an enjoyable experience, and we rely on you to participate and to give us information and tell us how the study is affecting you. But it's really nice to hear from you both that that this has been a positive experience. That's really the idea, and again, it's entirely dependent upon the participation of people like yourselves. Yeah.
So if we keep moving, there was actually a question from the audience about what PPMI has accomplished to date, and it's a great segue into this next slide and really the impact that PPMI has had in the past 11 years. And I made a few allusions to it earlier, but Ken, maybe, or Dr. Merrick, so used to calling you Ken, but Dr. Merrick, may I maybe turn it over to you to kind of maybe give us a brief summary of what are some of the highlights that have come out of PPMI since it launched?
Sure. So, I mean, PPMI has really been, a game changer for Parkinson's research, and in a number of ways. One is that we have been, over the last now decade, collecting both clinical data, imaging data, biosamples, and all of these data have really been widely utilized and we've helped to accelerate a number of clinical trials that are ongoing and developing. And this really was the goal of PPMI from its start, is to really work with pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, to enable them to more rapidly bring drugs to clinical studies and hopefully, again, into clinical practice. I think that's really an important issue. I think it's also been important because one of the goals of PPMI from its start was to develop sort of standardized approaches to collecting information. So the way we collect data, or the way we collect samples, the way we do all of the work that we do has become a model for other groups. And now we can actually look at this more carefully. Whoops! I think my I'm being asked by my Alexa to answer some questions. I apologize. And I think the third thing I think that's so important about PPMI is that from the start it has been an open source data. All of the information is available to researchers around the world. And millions of people have taken advantage of this. So millions of researchers have got these data to do their own work and advance the field. And I think that might seem like, very straightforward. Why wouldn't everybody do this? It would seem like a natural way to do research, but it's actually very different from the way research had been done prior to PPMI. And now it is becoming more of a standard. And really, I think, again, stands to accelerate research and get new ideas into clinical studies and into practice more effectively.
I was pleased that it was non-proprietary data, that it didn't belong to one company and that anyone can access it to his study. That was important to me.
And it isn't proprietary. That's a really good point. This is a pre-competitive consortium. This is what the Fox Foundation has achieved. They have brought 30 plus groups together, all of whom have agreed that it is in everyone's interest to collect this information so everyone can benefit from it. And that's really, the way it should be, but it's also an unusual situation.
Yes, it's not. Unfortunately, it's still not the norm for science and for research. I think we want to leave enough time to address some of the questions that the audience has posed. So, if we move to the next slide, I just wanted to reiterate again that this is hopefully you could take that you could glean that this is a really I think unique study whose impact is enormous in terms of what it could do for us in terms of understanding the disease and eventually perhaps one day preventing the disease if we can better understand the risk and who may go on to develop Parkinson's. And so, we wanted to just remind you all that if you are interested in learning more about this study and if you've been recently diagnosed with Parkinson's, you can click on the resource link to a resource list to find a site near you. And if you're over 18 and living in the US, US and may or may not have Parkinson's, but you also are interested in joining, consider PPMI Online. And again, there is you can click on the Get Started button in the Take Action box on the bottom right of your screen. But what I'd love to do right now is segue a little bit into some of the questions that we've gotten from the audience over the course of the conversation. And I might actually go back to you, Dr. Merrick, because we had a question here about risk and talking about risk and, sort of the fact the study is looking to address it. Could you talk a little bit about what we know about risk right now about Parkinson's, risk for developing Parkinson's, and what do we actually hope the study will tell us? How will that increase our knowledge about risk?
Absolutely. This is a really tricky subject because on the one hand, we would like to identify individuals who have some risk, but of course, even some risk doesn't mean you're going to get Parkinson's disease, and we don't want to make people anxious or concerned. But I think what we've learned over time is that we can identify certain events that occur even before the typical symptoms of Parkinson's disease occur. Some of these are related to different biochemical changes that occur. Some of these are related to different changes we can detect by imaging. Some of these are just different symptoms people get. So I think, as an example, one type of symptom that people can get prior to the onset of Parkinson's disease is that they have a loss of their sense of smell. And as Ray was saying earlier, while it is true that most people with Parkinson's disease have a loss of sense of smell, most people who have a loss of sense of smell are never going to get Parkinson's disease. So what we're trying to do is kind of collect all these bits of information and develop a better tool to be able to provide people with an accurate assessment of what their risk might be, and learn from those people who are at risk whether we can intervene at an earlier stage and ultimately, as we were saying earlier, prevent the onset of Parkinson's disease moving forward.
Thank you, Ken. Ray, there were some questions that came out while you were talking a little bit about what to expect in a study visit and if you came to the site. And the first question was, does one have to commit to doing everything in PPMI if you enroll in the study?
That's a good question. Obviously that's our goal is for folks that will want to commit to everything. And usually it's, someone's asking that question out of the fear of the unknown. What is a lumbar puncture? What does that have to do? What's the level of radiation I might experience going through scans and things like that? And that's where we have very well built together consent forms to read ahead of time so that you really are very informed about what's going on. But yeah, in terms of doing all of the testing, that's our main goal. But I think for some folks, as long as we do attempt to try to do all of the testing, if for some reason there's maybe a one-off here that we can't do with a person for a particular reason, we kind of take it on a case-by-case basis. We could work through that and see if, we have to take an alternative route, so to speak. For example, we've had people with scoliosis participate in the study. And for those of you who don't know, scoliosis is that curve to the back and not great for just doing a blind lumbar puncture. So we do fluoroscopy. We do a specialized procedure and we go right in and right out.
If I may, let me interrupt there. I have scoliosis. So I guess my situation accounts for what you've just said. And so the diagnostics, the testing takes a different approach.
Mm-hmm. You got
because of the scoliosis.
Right. Exactly. So that's the kind of thing. Yeah. Perfect example.
And Ray, there was another question, which I think you probably also receive over the course of talking to participants or potential participants, which is, can I join PPMI if I'm in another Parkinson's clinical trial testing a new treatment? And I think one of the situations we're confronted with today, which is not a bad thing, it's a good thing, but it's challenging, is that there's actually a lot of clinical trials happening in Parkinson's, which is wonderful, but it does mean that, we're all looking for participants. So when you get that question, what's the answer?
Yeah, that's great. It's not a simple answer either. I wish it was, but it's a great question, because we want people to really participate in research. There is a lot going on. So it really depends on the kind of research that person's participating in. If they're participating in something where it's levodopa based, it's maybe an approved medicine like that for Parkinson's, and they're testing out a different feature of it, we would say no, because we don't want people on approved medicine for Parkinson's. But when there's the case of maybe an experimental, a new therapeutic that's out there, say an anti-diabetic medicine, which, right now it doesn't have an indication for Parkinson's. But if that's a particular trial that they were interested in or participating in, that wouldn't exclude them from participating in PPMI. They would be able to do both. And in some cases, there is some overlap between the kinds of testing that we do in each study. And some of the information, thankfully, due to open channels and how the research works, that information, the person can agree to share that information where it needs to overlap. For example, DAT scan. They won't have to redo a DAT scan to be part of PPMI or vice versa, depending on some criteria there to make sure it all works out. Or even a study in exercise, for example. That's an intervention, but right now we haven't concluded that, yes, definitely this is a cure, it slows progression, but we're looking at that. What is the impact of exercise to a great degree, even though we know it improves quality of life, but can we say it slows progression? And we're looking for markers of that, inflammatory markers, biomarker type things in the blood and through imaging even. So there's no short answer to that. We want people to participate in multiple studies if they can, and if they're participating in a study that is allowed. So.
Final question. Go ahead, Jen.
I was just going to say, I was worried when I had in 2015 bilateral DBS, deep brain stimulation. And I was concerned that it would disqualify me from the study, and it didn't. So there is some leeway.
And so I would just say, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Jen,
I'm sorry.
Can I add to that? Both my father and brother had deep brain stimulation procedures. My father was one of the originals in that whole course of treatment way back in the 60s. And they both experienced both positive and not positive results. But they were anxious to participate for the hope of a positive outcome.
I was just going to encourage people who are asking these questions about, do they need to do everything? Can they be part of clinical trials? Which we're trying to be as inclusive as possible. So I would bring these questions to, if you're near a clinical site or you want to call someone, and let's see if there's a way to enable that to happen. So I would be, just to be, our goal is to try to be as inclusive as we can be. Yeah.
And I did want to just say there are a lot of questions in the chat about how to find out about a site. So if you want to find a PPMI site, the first link in the resources list is a link to recruiting PPMI sites. And for those who may be outside of the U.S., that includes links to sites outside of the U.S. as well. We have 12 countries participating, including Canada, and sites in Europe and Israel. So definitely just wanted to flag that, since there seems to be a lot of questions. questions. We have 5 minutes left, and I think I would like to end it actually by asking Jen and Jerry a question. But before I do so, Ken, there's some more questions about kind of if you can go into a little bit more detail about some of the specific scientific results coming out of PPMI.
Absolutely. So I talked a little bit about the broad results, but more specifically, I think really PPMI has been, some key results out of PPMI have been that now we are using dopamine imaging in Parkinson's studies, both as tools to identify who gets into the study and as a tool to monitor change over time. PPMI really data was used in order to enable that to happen. That's a key issue. We're collecting data from spinal fluid, as we've discussed, and now we have already shown that there is an ability to detect synuclein and spinal fluid, and we believe that this may actually lead us to a very valuable kind of a test that can be widely used in detecting this protein, which we know is affected in Parkinson's, and we can detect synuclein as a way of identifying whether people might have Parkinson's disease. We've looked at cognitive changes in Parkinson's disease over time and have added to our expectation and how we might think about ultimately understanding cognitive impairment in Parkinson's disease. There's really a wide array of information that's been collected that spans the gamut from clinical information to biomarker data in blood and spinal fluid to imaging data and genetic data, where we have really had an opportunity to really have detailed discovery of the genetics of everyone in PPMI. And this has really led us to really understand better how individuals with various genetic variants might change with regard to their Parkinson's disease over time, and potentially how therapies might be utilized in those individuals as well. So I'm going to stop there because I know we want to go back to Jen and Jerry, but this is an area where we're very excited about the data that has been acquired and is being acquired in the study.
Thank you, Ken. And Jen, Jerry, I want to end it with you by asking the two of you, to sort of to close us out, so to speak, on this webinar, and by answering sort of, you both are participants in PPMI. If there's one message you would like to leave individuals who've joined us on this webinar, what would that be? What would you share with them? What would be your last remarks to all of these people listening to us today?
One of the things that I experienced is that a disease like this can make you feel isolated and alone, and that you're only going through this by yourself. The study disproves that, gives you someone to reach out to. I've had conversations with other study participants in the Institute. The doctors at the Institute are phenomenal. It's made me feel less isolated, and that is a good thing.
Thank you, Jen. Jerry?
The fact that those who are out there and have listened to this presentation indicates that there is sufficient interest to maybe want to go forward. I would encourage you to do so, because wherever this leads, the fact that you have participated will make you feel good. So I encourage you to join us.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Merrick, Jen, Jerry, Ray, for being part of our community and for joining us today. And thank you all for joining us as well, wherever you may be. We are going to be sending a link to this webinar so you can listen to it again or share it as you may like. And we sincerely hope that you found it helpful and informative. We wish you a great rest of the day and a very happy holiday season. And thank you again for joining us.